Look, he won't see you.
Who's the hot chick up in the corner?
It's Cheyenne Jackson.
Oh, Cheyenne. What's up, girl? She's smiling. She can hear you.
Look,
This is being recorded forever.
There you go. It ain't muted.
Cheyenne, he was totally teasing. I'm sorry. He just wanted to see if you could hear.
See?
Well, guys, did you have a pretty good week?
Very busy week.
What was that?
I said it was a very busy week.
Very busy?
Mhm.
That can be good. And I was driving north Sunday night, and it wasn't too bad between St. George and Cedar City. But as you get steadily getting north, people, I don't know, I think that people in snow, when they see they have four-wheel drive or all-wheel drive, they believe that they can go up walls like Spider-Man, and people stop thinking. And it just becomes a little unnerving. Anyway, this week we're going to be talking about one of the modules. See if I can remember which one. Module 4. Good. And before we get into that, I wanted to know, do you guys have any questions from the stuff about the stuff that we have spoken, done so far?
I don't think I have any questions.
I think there was a couple of you that are on here who had some issues with resubmitting stuff, and I think we took care of that. Was that you, Jackson, that needed to that resubmitted something?
I
told me
think
about it?
so. Yeah, and we were
Okay.
able to work it out. So thank you for
Okay.
your help.
All right.
on
Good.
that.
Excellent. If there's an assignment that has a 0 on it, all that means is I wanted to trigger something to in Canvas to remind you. Do you guys remember what my policy is on late assignments?
Everything is due at the end of the quarter.
End of the semester.
Well,
Yeah.
yeah, semester.
Yeah. So if there's a 0, it's just to let you know that I'm just nudging you, and that's it. So you can resubmit something if you're not happy with the grade. You can resubmit it as many times as you want to. There was one young man. I think Brittany, your mic is on. There was one young man whose parents were in their 70s when COVID hit, and he was not able to do much schooling for almost the whole semester, and his grade was like a really solid D. And in the last 2 weeks of the class, he just started turning in everything he had done, that he'd just been so involved with his parents. And by the time he was done turning everything in, he brought it up to an A-. So I don't want anybody to panic. If you think it's going to take you longer than you feel you should on something, just let me know, and just so I don't worry. It's not my grade, it's your grade, but if there is something that you need help on, the on-campus, what's it called? I think it's the accommodations office can help, and they're really good, and they usually will send me a letter, and we can work things out with that too. And if you need more time on an assignment, or you feel guilty for whatever reason, just let me know. I have also gotten a couple. I'm sorry, something is bothering me in the shirt. This is an Iranian style artist shirt. Notice the cool buttons up here and the tight collar. But sometimes when you get one on the internet, I don't know if people forget and leave like bits of straw or something in the sleeves, but sometimes it's kind of irritating. Anyway, I've also gotten a couple emails where people have said, oh no, the assignments are locked. Do you remember what we talked about regarding the locked assignments?
You have to do the assignments previous to be able to continue moving forward.
Right. You have to open up each element of the module. What I found is by requiring that, people are a lot less confused when they get to the assignment. You know, and even if you just skim through really fast to get to the assignment, it still helps more. And that's the easiest way to make sure that it doesn't stay locked. This module, number 4, is all about kind of the nuts and bolts of art, and also using critical thinking to, it's kind of an introduction of critical thinking to the art of Mali, the Kingdom of Mali. Nice chest. Um, I I'm pretty sure that none of you have heard before this class about the original Lion King. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. We could have picked anything. We could have examined the Kalevala of Finland or something, but I wanted to kind of explore a little bit of the art of a culture that nobody's ever heard of, so that you have an opportunity to use the skills of critical thinking that you're learning to kind of examine it. And I think that you'll find as you go through this that you guys are a lot more remarkable than you probably give yourself credit for. Most of the stuff that we're going to be covering, you already respond to, you're already familiar with, but you may not be familiar with the articulation of the terms. And it's just because the fact that you live in our society today and you have good eyes. I mean, that's pretty much it. So the first bit I wanted to talk about were the nuts and bolts and principles of art. Then we'll move from that to applying what we're learning. And then we'll talk about each of the 3 assignments quickly. First is, as we talk about art, one of the first things that we look at, especially art in a reference of a visual frame, is line. And this can be 3-dimensional or 2-dimensional. There are a lot of different definitions of line. Who can give me the math definition? It's the shortest distance between what?
Is it 2 points in space?
Yeah, that is the math definition, but that is not the definition that will score you points on the quiz. The art definition that we're using for this class is 2 points connected in space. Not the shortest distance, just 2 points connected. A couple other definitions that I like is a point that went for a walk. And another one is a mark that is significantly longer than it is wide. So to give you an idea, so line is a pattern device or a structure device. It's not a mathematical concept when we're talking about line in art. And there's lots of different kinds of lines. And there's lots of different kinds of things that we can use in reference to line. And I'll mention a couple and then we'll talk about a few. One is width. In art, lines are, in math, lines have absolutely no dimension other than length. But in art, lines will have different thicknesses and widths. And you can see that in a lot of paintings. If you look at a painting by Cezanne, he's going to be outlining things with a black line that's usually right around a 1/4 inch thick. You look at somebody like Van Gogh, and the short lines that he uses to do his paintings are probably going to be closer to about 3/8 to 1/2 inch wide. And there may only be a little bit longer than they are wide. And sometimes the line width is going to be extremely narrow, and sometimes the line width won't be visual other than the line is generated by the difference between 2 fields coming together. If you look in the wall behind Cheyenne, you have the very obvious white line that's right behind her head, but there's another line created with that very dark structure, horizontal structure coming up to that white line, and there's another line created with that the ceiling coming down and making that gray field where it ends as it touches the white. So we do have one physical line, which is that white line, but we have two other implied lines where the fields come together and you see the line only as a function of the difference between the two fields. Can everybody see that? Thank you, Cheyenne, for designing your apartment that way so we can use it as an example. Very thoughtful.
Anytime.
There, there's a directionality to a lot of lines. A lot of the times when we see the line varying in thickness, we generate certain assumptions about the directionality. And lines also have certain length. If you look at architecture, for example, anything that's like a brick type building, you'll see lines of a lot of different weights and thicknesses and lengths as the separations between bricks, the separation between different structures, where the doors are, where the windows are. There's lots of different kinds of forms of lines. Lines can be used. Do you guys remember the contour drawings you did? Lines in math are typically just straight. Well, they're always just straight, unless you're in the gravity well of a black hole. But lines in art are all sorts of things. When you did your gesture drawings, you put your pen or your pencil to paper, didn't lift it up until you were done, and that was one continuous squiggly line. Gesture lines are common too. Some examples of that are when you look at manga or cartoons in a newspaper, sometimes the movements of characters will be symbolized with short lines coming away from body parts or their body as a whole. And it kind of gives it the suggestion that they've been moving. Gesture lines, as you're sketching, a lot of times you use that. You use your pencil or your pen lightly to kind of give you or to record a general feeling for movement or shape. You're not trying to get anything exact. You're just trying to get a basic feel for the movement. Those are called gesture lines. What do you think sketch lines might be? Anybody have an idea?
I have an idea. Sketch lines, I think, might be where you don't lift your pencil off the paper and it just kind of looks jaggedy.
Yeah, you're using the line to kind of feel out a shape or a form. Yeah, very good. How about so the line becomes its own kind of thing because it is jaggedy, and it's jaggedy because you're using the line to kind of think through the shape that you're making. So excellent. How about an implied line? Can anybody guess what that might be? Everybody hold out your pointer finger and point at something in the room you're in. You've just created an implied line. Everybody look at Brittany. Everybody can see that line coming off of her finger, can't you? Even though it doesn't exist, you still know it's there, right? That's what an implied line is. Your brain turns something into a line because it knows that that's where the attention is going. You can also create an implied line by, if you're drawing, picking up your pencil every once in a while, making something like a dashed line. It's still a line, but it's not a complete line. And your brain fills in the details and understands that a line is supposed to be there. Sometimes a line can be created just by people moving in the same direction. Like if you're sitting somewhere on an upper floor and you look out the window and you see people walking across the grass, they create a line when they're going in the same direction or following each other, even though there's not really a line there. And those are all examples of implied lines. And we'll see those as we look at different art. We'll see those. Excuse me. I had a really good tostada today and a couple hours ago, and it's still poking its head up and saying hi every once in a while. So pardon me in advance. But as we go on and look at different art over the next several months, you'll see all these different kinds of line, and you'll make a lot of these kinds of lines as well. Some of the other nuts and bolts of art are shape. Can anybody want to give a crack at defining what a shape is?
I'm gonna say different lines coming together.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. If you look at the John Wayne poster behind you, there's a very definite shape that's created with the implied lines of his silhouette coming against the field, the white field of the door. That's a very strong shape. Lines creating some sort of a field or boundary of a field of an area. So yeah, very good. Now, if you bring that into 3 dimensions, then it becomes a form instead of just a shape. So the difference between a shape and a form is that shape is 2D, like you described, and form is 3D. A lot of the times in 2D, you can outline a shape drawing lines, but in 3 dimensions, the form is realized because, like Cheyenne's hair against her ceiling, the line of separation is implied. What do you think value is? If you look over Jackson's shoulder, you see the shadows there that are cast by, it looks like at least 3 different light bulbs. Each of those have a different density of the shadow. Those different densities are the value. It's the lightness and darkness of something. If you look at on any of your faces or your heads, if you look at how the shadows and the highlights kind of create a form, it allows us to see, feel that your heads aren't flat; that they feel 3 dimensional because we can see shadow and we can see highlights. That's the use of value to define a form, a 3 dimensional space or volume. What's texture? I see some good examples right behind Brittany.
Texture would be where it's got a different feel or a different surface area.
Yeah, exactly. You have the smooth wall, and then it looks like there's a dark drape hanging down. You have all those horizontal lines with different values in very tight spaces, and that creates another texture. Then you have the textures, very interesting textures of the drapery that's running along horizontally. Texture is pretty much anything that gives interest to a shape or a volume or a surface. Textures can generally be visual or physical. Most often they're both. If we look at like Jackson's hair is cut very short, there is kind of a furry texture to that. So we know it's a physical texture, but the physical texture, the way it reacts to the light, gives us a visual texture as well. And you can make somebody feel like there is a physical texture on the drawing that you're doing by mimicking how the visual texture of that thing or how the visual element of that texture might look. Our brains fill in almost automatically the extra information that we might need so we can suspend disbelief over viewing something and think that there's an actual texture to it. There's a couple really good painters on the Utah Tech um, faculty that are real experts at creating what feels very much as physical texture in the 2 dimensional paintings that they create. Now, and then another one of these nuts and bolts is color. Color also has value to it. And color can give us information about the volume of space that something resides within. I'm going to ask a question that might seem kind of odd. Well, which color is closer to you, red or blue?
I'm gonna say red.
Yeah. If you have any doubt, look outside when the sun is up and see what happens to the mountains as they are farther and farther away from you. Because of the area that we are, because of just living on the surface of the planet, we're kind of trained to believe that blue denotes distance. And what's interesting too is that blue is the color of light as it's pulling away from us as well. Have you guys heard about the term redshift in astronomy? Redshift is when astronomers use the shift in color of stars moving closer or away, or how fast they're moving away from us, to help them define the distance of those stars from us. So by using that, you can play tricks with people's eyes or make paintings interesting by using color in unexpected ways. Using reds in areas that are supposed to be receding, or using blues in areas that are supposed to be close, can make people a little bit more interested in what you're doing. There's a great number of really excellent pastel artists that will do portraits where you can read the portrait as very naturalistic, very photorealist, but they use a lot of blues and pinks and reds to define something that we don't ordinarily think of having those colors, because they're very aware of how colors are used. Colors also have value to them. Lighter colors, or some colors appear lighter, and so they have a lighter value. Other colors appear darker, and so they have a darker value. And then we can also play with people's expectations with that as well, where we use perhaps colors that traditionally have lighter values and give them a darker values. Like, for example, having very pale blues or having very strong reds. And again, these are just things I want you to be aware of, and we'll talk about them more, but I want you to be aware of these kinds of words, so when you start critically thinking and examining art or the things around you, you can have these in your bag of vocabulary tricks to help you articulate what you're seeing and what you're viewing. Now, there's also several principles of art. And there's a couple of these that fit really close to each other, or they almost are different sides of the same coin. One is repetition and variety. When we look at something, like in the background behind me, you can see there's a lot of relatively short vertical lines. And then you have some of those lines close together, particularly, let's see, where is my hand? Yeah, right over here. You see where my finger's pointing? A lot of these vertical lines almost are the same distance away from each other. And then as you move over to the farther out, there's a wall there that kind of breaks up that rhythm that's established with these vertical lines being very close to each other. When you do that in your own imagery, it helps set up interest for whoever's viewing. We respond to things that seem to upset a balance. If we get too used to the visual rhythm of something, or you get too used to the audio rhythm of something, you start tuning it out. And so if you're painting something like a forest or an orchard, yeah, you'll draw a lot of vertical tree trunks, but to generate interest, you'll upset the rhythm that you're creating. You need to establish a rhythm and then upset it, give it variety so that people become interested. If all these trees are the exact same width and the same spacing apart, it's has a great tendency to help the brain begin to shut off. There's another dichotomy or another duo called, I forgot to mention, in the repetition and variety segment, you'll see a painting called Nude Descending a Staircase. If you guys want an extra credit point, tell me correctly which gender the nude is who's descending the staircase. This is one of the earliest examples of cubism in the modern era. And cubism is really interesting because it sets up that idea of repetition or rhythm with usually generally horizontal and vertical strokes, and then it plays with expectations and creates variety. And this is done as an effort to essentially illustrate the object or the subject of the painting um, from a variety of views and from a variety of points of time all at the same moment. So look at that painting, Nude Descending a Staircase, and when you write your 3 things down that you learned today, uh, tell me which gender the subject of the painting is. The next portion of the principles is another dichotomy, dominant and subordinate. What do you think dominant means?
It would be the overpowering or majority.
Yeah, the principal or primary portion of whatever it is. If we look at the pictures of each of us, the dominance and pretend that it's somebody's painting, the dominant portion of each of these images is going to be the individual. That's the primary focus. And then the subordinate portion of it is the background. But even more than that, the dominant is going to be the face of each of you, and a subordinate in that dominant space of you is going to be the clothing and the hair. You know, we focus on the face. And if you look, that's just what our brains automatically do. We see the hair and we see the clothing as surrounding and framing the face of each of us, and we see each of us in the foreground, and so our brains decide that makes it dominant. Except for the case of Jackson, it doesn't matter where you put John Wayne in a room, he's always going to be dominant. But then we're also talking about primary and secondary. What's that?
I said that's right.
Yep. The primary is usually going to be associated with the dominant portion of the imagery, and the secondary is usually going to be the subordinate area. You know, there's going to be tertiary points of interest as well, but anytime you make something, it's very rare that you do the thing just by itself with only one focal point of interest. Most of the time, you look at paintings, portraiture, sculpture, anything like that, there's multiple points of interest with usually one or two, dominant focal points. There's also balance. Uh, if we look at each of us, there's a certain balance in the frame of the, if we pretend that the screenshot of us is a piece of art, there's going to be a balance there. We look at Brittany's, hers is a rather informal balance because she's on one side of the frame and on the other side is a very bright spot of that lamp behind her. And they're two very different things, but they have a tendency to balance each other. Informal balance is when the balance is not evenly weighted, but it still works. Now, if we look at Cheyenne, she is pretty much in the center of the frame, and the two sides of her, although they're slightly different, hers is more of a formal balance. Can you see the difference? Her Cheyenne is pretty much in the center of her image, and the two sides of her over each of her shoulders are almost the same. That's more formal. When we look at Brittany, she's on one side, the bright spot of the lamp is on the other, and that becomes an informal balance because the two sides are not the same. Balance is what you can use to direct people's attention and also generate interest. You set up a rhythm, you set up repetition, and then you engage variety to give a point of interest. You set up balance, and then do something to upset that or make it not quite formal and make it a little bit more interesting to whoever's viewing. And then going back to the dominant and subordinate, we're also talking about a focal point. Almost every time you create something, you usually have one specific thing that you want people to reference. Whether or not you want them to notice it right away it becomes the focal point of whatever it is that you're making. And that's not just true of the work that you do, that's true of most of the work that we will look at as well. Some of the examples where that's not true is a lot of decorative arts. And I'm thinking specifically Islamic style geometry and vegetal work. That's a little bit different because it's designed to use repetition and variety as well as dominant and subordinate shapes, but it's designed to have as few focal points as possible, mostly to help people achieve a meditative state or prayerful state. And so there are times when the art will not have a focal point, but most of the time it will. Now, in this module, I wanted to shift that a little bit and provide an opportunity for people to use the kind of vocabulary that we've been generating and the 4 tools of artistic critique to examine something. So I've given you links to 3 different websites and very specific directions on how to view the websites. So the first one there's 12 links that I identify, and I want you to spend 5 minutes just examining each of those 12. So that'll take about an hour. And the second one I want you to spend about 15 minutes on, and the third one I want you to spend about 20 minutes on. I give very specific directions to it. But each of those, I want you to look at what I'm directing you to and just hold in the back of your mind those 4 steps of the tools of artistic critique. Do any of you remember what those 4 steps are? The first one starts with a D. When we first come to something, and we're specifically using art as our imagery for this. When you first come to it, the first thing you do is describe it. That's the first tool. And you describe it just looking at it as a physical object. How does it impact the universe we share? The second one is analyze. And that's when you look at it and try to imagine how the artist made whatever it is we're looking at. The third is interpret. And this is when we start guessing at the artist's worldview. What kind of society are they in? What is there a message that they're trying to give us? Or is it just a design element? Is it just a toy? How are we reacting to it? And the fourth one is evaluate. Is it successful? And how is it successful? What I want to do is go over really quickly the 3 different assignments that we have and give an example of one process. How can I say this? Give an example of how to process the second assignment. The first assignment is you're going to be looking at something online, and then you're going to be referring to the vocabulary of the nuts and bolts of the principles of art to kind of describe it and address it. Then the second one is I'm going to have you kind of apply those tools to one of the images you saw as you were going through the art of the Mali Kingdom. We're specifically going to be using one of the equestrian writers that seem to be a pretty identifying subject for art from the Mali Kingdom. The Mali Kingdom, when Sundiata and his family were in power, covered at least 7 or 8, maybe even 11 different countries in Africa. So, it covered he had an impact over an area from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to Ethiopia. So a huge area that he kind of had his fingers on. But there's going to be lots of examples that you can pick from, where you're going to pick one image of an equestrian rider from those 3 websites, and then you're going to write 6 sentences about it. And I want to walk you through that. So I'm going to do a screen share right now. And tell me if you see this image. All right. Can you see this?
Yeah, I can see it.
All right. Can any of you make out what it says it is? Can you see the writing, or is that out of the frame?
I can see the writing, but I can't pronounce the
Okay.
first two words.
It's a equestrian rider from the Jena culture, and it's out of terracotta. The 6 sentences that you'll write, the first one is a description. The second is one sentence. I'm sorry. The first sentence is giving the title of what you've chosen and from which website. The second sentence is a short description. Third sentence is a short analysis. Fourth sentence is a short interpretation. Fifth sentence is a short evaluation. And the sixth sentence is a short description of how your perspective on it changed after you went through those 4 steps. So the first sentence is, I'm going to say this is an equestrian rider. It's called the Jena Terracotta Equestrian Rider, and it's from the first website. My description is going to be something about it being terracotta, but do any of you want to take a stab at describing this in a sentence? What are some of the features that you notice right away that you can describe?
I would say it's a man riding a horse, and they've both got not individual, unique patterns about them.
All right, excellent. You could also that's very good. There's that thing that almost looks like chainmail or curls around the horse's bridle. The horse's ears are standing straight up. It looks like it's a very static pose. The rider looks like he's wearing like a jockey helmet and maybe a quiver. So all those are things that can be used to describe this. The third sentence is analyze. How do you think this was made by the artist, whoever made it? Who wants to take a stab at that?
It looks like it's made out of wood.
Yeah, it looks like it's made out of wood, and it is made out of clay, but it definitely looks like it's made out of wood. Why do you think it looks like it's made out of wood? Do you think the artist may have carved it from the clay?
I think they may have started with it by hand before they used tools, just because of how skinny everything is.
Okay, excellent. But those are the kinds of observations you can put into that third sentence. So excellent. The fourth sentence is interpret. What do you think this might mean? Well, are you familiar with the phrase prestige item? It's an archaeological term that means essentially an item whose primary purpose is to show off to your neighbors. Now, if we look at this, my interpretation of this is it could be a toy for a little kid, but knowing that it's made out of clay and it's in pretty good shape after 800 years, I'm saying I'm going to think it's more likely intended as a prestige item with those kind of really tight textures and the care that it was made to give it the form it's in. I think it was more like something that was set on a table or a mantle to show people that you could spend money or time on an object like this and not have to have immediate use out of it, which meant that in most of the cultures, that usually means you're impressing somebody that you have disposable income. So that's going to be one interpretation for me. I think another one would be maybe that is a quiver, and it shows that the artist is trying to share that this person is ready to defend somebody. Right? He's ready to go off and support somebody. Maybe the fact that the horse has that thing that almost looks like armor over the head is showing that the status of this warrior he takes his job very seriously. But there's a lot of different kinds of things that you can say about interpretation. Now, who wants to take a stab at a one sentence evaluation of it? Do you believe it's successful?
Can you repeat that question again?
Yeah, we just want a sentence addressing the idea of evaluating it. Is it successful as an object of art? Is it successful as a prestige item? Or is it successful as something that's made well?
Oh, well, I think both. I mean, it has a lot of detail. It's very articulate. It has a lot of realistic elements, like the helmet, the bridle, and the adornment on both the human.
Yeah, I think those are all really good. I'm sorry, your sound faded out a little bit, but those are all really good points. And I could go into the sentence about evaluating. So, Brittany, would you say that it is successful as an art piece? Yeah, I think it's also successful just as an example of craftsmanship. The only thing broken after almost a millennium is the guy's forearms. It has really stood up to the test of time. And I think that's a strong testament to the success of whoever created it. Now, the last sentence is, did your perspective on this change as we went through those 4 steps? And if it did change, how did it change? If it didn't, explain that too. Did you see those things when you first looked at it? Does anybody want to take a stab at addressing that? How did your thoughts about this object change from before we started talking about it until now?
I think a couple of things that changed for me before, I just recognized it as a nice piece, didn't think of maybe what it resembled or what it had been through, but now I realize it is a pretty nice piece, being that the idea of it could have been a child's toy, which leads me to see how I now recognize that his arms are gone, which is an interesting piece, but also that the idea of a prestige item, that the way it's decorated and the condition it's in, that it might be something that's worth value or meant something to someone.
Isn't that interesting, Jackson? How just thinking about something and using our critical thinking kind of changes our relationship with it. It seems to mean a little bit more, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, I think that's pretty cool. So that's walking through that assignment. And then the last one is, thank you guys. All of you did really well. The last one is, this is a studio assignment where you're going to be making a few really rapid textural collages, and it describes how to do that. And then one of them that you like the most, you're going to try to copy those textures that are in the collage with a pencil. And I would, just look at the description and outline of that assignment and just follow it as well as you can. And that's what you're graded on. Again, you're not graded on whether or not you're a master with the pencil. You're graded on how well you try. All right. And if the thing takes if the assignment asks you to spend 15 minutes on an element or portion of the assignment, do your best to spend that amount of time, because that is really important. Your brain, your cognition changes roles at different segments of time. And if you don't do things for a specific length of time, if you cheat yourself and shorten it up, the neuronic connections that you're trying to establish fizzle out, actually. Believe it or not, that's all real science. So if you're asked to spend 15 minutes or an hour on something, please do so. All right? I see we're also joined by Nicole. I'm glad you could make it. Again, when you are going to get attendance for this, um, what you'll need to do is go to the attendance form, portion for this week, write down 3 things you learned from today's meeting. And if you want that extra credit, look at that image of new descending a staircase and see if you can determine which gender the figure is. All right. I usually get about 5 to 10% of students guessing right. So let's see how well you guys do. Well, that's all that I wanted to cover for today. Does anybody have questions about what we talked about?
No, I don't think so.
I just have a question about the assignment for this week. If we don't have an, a sketchbook, can we do it on just a normal piece of paper?
I'm sorry, the sound fizzled out, but I think I heard you say something like if you don't have a sketchbook. I'm not requiring a sketchbook for this class at all. If you guys want to do it on printer paper, that is perfectly fine. Okay. We are going to be doing some painting starting next week, and I sent an email about that. If you can't get access to painting paper, like watercolor paper is really good. If you can't get access to that, I don't want you to worry about it too much. I'd rather you do the painting on printer paper than not do the painting at all. Okay. If you are going to be doing watercolors on printing paper, make sure you put plastic down first on whatever surface that you're working on, because the paint will blade through, and the possibility of damage that paint does to the surface is directly proportional to how expensive the surface is. And that is always the case. It's never been different. So make sure you put plastic down before you work on something, or if you have a roommate you don't particularly like and you want to accidentally borrow their t-shirt, go ahead and do that too. I can't say that and have it recorded, can I? Let's pretend I was joking. So if you guys don't have any more questions or anything, that's all I have, and I'll look forward to seeing you guys next week. I did want to mention that the supplies, I'm telling you about the painting. I've been able to get these things. I got everything on that list for less than $15. And most of the time, especially if you have a family nearby, a lot of that stuff you can bum off your family, and or borrow if you have a friend that took an art class, they aren't taking one now, see if you can borrow their stuff and use their stuff. I got a lot of stuff from a guy who was taking art classes in hopes of enticing a certain somebody to go out with him, and she ended up joining the army. So in disgust, he gave all the supplies to me, and that was win for me, and I'm sure he got over it. But I would like you guys as much as possible to be mindful of what you're getting, what you're using, because I think it's kind of, unless you want to do a lot more art, I want you to spend as little as you possibly can, because I don't want you to plug a lot of value into something that you're never going to be touching again in the future. Okay. All right. Well, that's all I've got. So I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful week. If you have any other questions, go ahead and email me, and I will see you guys next week.
Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you.
right. We'll see you.